Hi everyone, so welcome back to my channel. So in this video we're going to see the most important topic in React.js, that is React class components. Okay, so basically in React.js we have two types of components. One is functional based components and next we have class based components. Like you have seen in the previous videos, we have been using only the functional based components. Okay, although class-based components are not that important because in production level we mostly use the functional based component because they are more easy to use. Okay, but in terms of interview, for the sake of interview, I'll be telling you this thing also because in interview they'll ask these questions. Okay, now let's just read a little bit about the class-based components. Okay, so what they say is before React 16.8 version, class components were the only way to track state and lifecycle on a React component. Okay, so here the term comes lifecycle. Okay, before going to the further step, let's understand some of the lifecycle stages that we have in React.js. So on the screen you can see the React component lifecycle. So this is the lifecycle methods that we are going to study, right? So during the life of a component, three stages comes. The first stage is mounting stage. That is the first stage when the component renders for the first time. Listen to me carefully. When the component renders for the first time, that stage is known as the mounting stage. Okay. Second stage is the updating stage. When the component gets updated. So the component gets updated because of three reasons. The first is whenever there are new props being passed. Second is whenever there is any state change. Okay, and the third is a force update, right? So this set state we have already seen in the last lecture, like how we were able to change the state. Like in the last video we have seen a counter application where we were incrementing the value of a variable by 1. Okay, so whenever the value was incrementing, the component was being re-rendered. So that is when the state changes. Ignore this set state because this is a part of the class-based components. In functional-based components we used to define our own method using the use state hook. Okay, so you can relate it with that. This set state we'll just see in a few minutes. Okay, the last stage is the unmounting stage. What is this unmounting stage? This is a stage when the component is removed from the DOM. Okay, when it is of no use, when it is removed from the DOM, then this unmounting stage appears. So these are the three stages that we have in the life cycle of a component. So these things we'll see in depth in the next video, but now the main motive of the lecture is like how we can create the counter application using the class-based structure. Like in the last video we have just created the same structure using the functional based component. Now in this video we'll see how we can create the same functionality using the class-based components. Okay, now let's just jump into the IDE. So this is the IDE, the Visual Studio that we are using so far. What I will do is in the components folder, I'll just create a folder. Inside this component folder, let's just name it as class. Okay, and in this class folder I'll create one component, let's say random.js. okay, so you must remember that in the functional based components we used to write RFCE to define the structure of that component, but in class based component we use RCC. If I press enter, you can see we got the structure for that. Okay, now let's understand each and everything in this class-based structure, right? So this is, we have export default, class keyword, and the name of the class. This is the name of this component itself. Okay, so this particular component extends component. What does it mean? The component is a parent component, okay, which is being extended by this child component. So here the random.js is a child component and this is a component which is a global component which is being extended by this child component. Okay, so inside this we have this render method. Inside this render method we have this return. Like in the functional based component we just used to have only return, not the render, but in this class based components we have this render also. Let's just read the documentation a little bit more. Okay, what does it say? With the addition of the hooks, functional based components are now almost equivalent to the class based components. Okay, now before the version 16.8, before the React version 16.8, what happened was we were only obliged to use the class-based components. Why? Because in the class-based components only we can track the state and the lifecycle methods. But because at that time functional-based components were considered stateless because there were no hooks at that time. But after this version, with the addition of the hooks in the functional-based components, now functional-based components are almost equivalent to the class-based components. Okay, that's why most of the developers, I would say every developer, they prefer only the functional-based components, right? That is why it is written there that feel free to skip this section and use the functional-based components instead. But for the sake of interviews, we are doing it. Otherwise, there is no use of it, right? Okay. Now, we will see that we have already seen like how we can create a class component. It extends this component, which is a parent component. Okay, let's read a little bit of documentation as well. When creating a React component, the component's name must start with the uppercase letter. That I've already explained in the last lectures that why we need it to be uppercase letter. The component has include extends react.component statement. This statement creates an inheritance to the react.component. You can simply write react.component or just component. Okay, both signifies the same itself, and gives your a component access to the react.components functions. What does it mean? So we have extended this component. This is the global component, the parent component. So it has some already defined functionality. If I write extends here, that means all the functionality of this parent component comes into this child component. Okay, using the extends keyword because we are using the inheritance concept here. Now we will create the same counter application. So for that we need to create a state variable. To create the state variable, we'll use the this.state syntax. But before that, let's understand that what is constructor in the lifecycle methods. So in this mounting stage, you can see at the top, this is a constructor, right? So this means that if we want to run certain functionality or we want to initialize some variables before the component loads for the first time, listen to me carefully, before the component loads for the first time, if we want to run certain functionality or if we want to initialize some variables, for that purpose, we use the constructor function. Okay, now as we want to create a state variable, okay, so we will create the state variable inside the constructor function. Okay, I'll just simply write here constructor. Okay, and I will just inside this I'll create that variable using this dot state equals to, let me just give the name as count, initial value as 0. Okay, now in this constructor method, what I'll do is I'll call the constructor of the parent class. Here the parent class is this component class. So if I want to call the constructor of the parent class, I'll use this super method, super function. Okay, now we have initialized this variable. Now what I want is I want to click on a button. Now we will create a button. Okay, and the text I'll write it as click me. Okay, now in this button I'll just create a event that is on click. Okay, like we used to do in the functional based components. Okay, in this we will update the state variable. How we will update? Using the set state method. Okay, this dot set state. Okay, and then this is the function, and in this I'll write the updated value of count as count colon this dot state dot count. Okay, this signifies the old value of it plus 1. Okay, that means using this set state method, I will update the count value to this dot state dot count, which is the initial value, plus 1. I'll increment it by 1. Okay, now I'll save it, and now we will import this component, this random component in the app.js, because ultimately the final output comes from there itself. I'll just open the app.js, and here at the end of it I'll write random. Okay, I got the suggestion. I'll just write it here. I'll save this. Now you can see on the screen, if I click on this button, the value is incrementing like we thought it to be, right? So you can see with the help of this class-based components, we have implemented the same functionality. I'm repeating that this is not for the production level. This is just for the interview sake, right? So here we come to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture we have seen like how we can create a class-based components, and we have also created this counter application using the class-based structure. Okay, in the next lecture we'll see this lifecycle methods in depth. Okay, but before that, do subscribe my channel because it takes a lot of hard work to create these videos, right? And yeah, you can share also with your friends because we are covering the whole Mern series, which is very helpful for you for the placement purpose. So yeah, that's all for today, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.